Hello, welcome to the U.S. Consulate Lagos's Facebook Live event on student visas. My name is Kalisha. I'm here with my colleague Bart, and today we're here to talk specifically about student visas, but this is part of a regular series that we have covering consulate services that we offer here at the consulate. So if you're interested in other types of visas, tourist visas, immigrant visas, feel free to check out the other videos here on our Facebook. They're archived. This one will also be archived if you want to reference it in the future. Before we get started, I just want to point out some of the resources that you can access. We have an office here called Education USA. So if you're a prospective student, you can come in any Wednesday at 10 a.m. and speak to our advisors who are here all week to discuss options for researching schools. And they will take you from the point of the beginning of your journey all the way to the point of getting to the U.S. So if you're interested in studying in the U.S., that's the place where you should start your journey. Beyond that, our U.S. Embassy website also has additional resources for those of you looking for standard information on visas, the application process, and anything from the point of actually applying to go to the U.S. So that website is ng.usembassy.gov/visas. So without further ado, let's get on into the questions. And I see there's some people already joining. If you do have questions, feel free to write them in the comments and we'll try to get to them. Okay? So the first question, what are the different kinds of visas available for exchange and study, Bart?
Well, thanks, Alicia. So there are three main different types of exchange and study visas. The ones that we see most here are F visas. Those are for full-time students in academic programs. These are going to either 2-year or 4-year universities within the United States. Those are the ones that we see the most. The next ones that we see are J visas. These are exchange visitor programs. So these range from fellowship programs to summer work programs. Generally tend to be short-term in nature. There are some restrictions afterwards on some of these programs on when you can come back to the United States. And finally, the last one are the M visas. These are vocational programs. Again, tend to be shorter term in nature and tend to be more towards hard skills. So we see these on flight schools and other vocational areas that we go from there. So.
Great. So a common question that we get is, what should I bring to my interview? The first thing that you should bring is an acceptance to a U.S. university, obviously. So the way that works is before you get to your visa interview, you will have already applied for your schools and you will have already received your acceptance letters. And once the school accepts you, you have a certain amount of time to accept their offer to attend that school. And if you do accept the offer as an international student, they will issue you something called an I-20. And an I-20 is basically just a government form that is required for all international students that gives us all the information about the school you're going to, the program that you're going to be in, the area of study that you're pursuing, the level of study you're pursuing, the amount of time that you're going to be staying in the U.S., the way that you're going to fund that program. So there's actually quite a bit of information in that form that we use during the interview. So that is the primary document that you need to bring as a student if you're an F or an M student. For our exchange scholars, the Js, there's a different form called a DS 2019, I believe. And that form is a similar form, but it's just a different format. So the school will also issue you, sometimes it's not a school, it might be an institution if you're like a doctor. So that form will also give us plenty of information about how long you're going for, what area it is, and whether or not you're subject to the residency requirement. So those forms are the primary document we need. In addition to that, you'll need to fill out a DS-160, which all visa applicants have to fill out. It just gives us information about who you are, your purpose of travel, etc. You can find that on ustraveldocs.com/ng. You'll also need what else?
The bank statement is something that we bring in. You mentioned the financial readiness. That is something that we do want to see, that you can afford the studies. Beyond that, past passports, if you have previous travel, we sometimes ask about that.
Yep.
And otherwise, just other things. Test scores, if you've taken some standardized tests, whether it's the SAT, the GRE, TOEFL, IELTS, bringing those copies of those scores in is also helpful for us to see that may be asked for.
And I guess that is a good segue, Bart, to talking about what we're actually looking for during the interview. We've talked about the documents we need, but what are we as consular officers really looking for in student applicants?
And Kalisha is varies amongst the students, but one common theme is generally that they're a credible student, that you're there to study, and that you're going to come back to Nigeria. That is really one of the main criteria that we look at is, are you a credible student, and are you going to be coming back?
Yep, and a lot of people wonder, like, in the couple of minutes that we speak to a visa applicant, how can we really tell whether or not they're going for the reason that they say they're going for, or whether or not they have intentions to come back to Nigeria? Well, the reality is, like we've just talked about, the documents that you submit ahead of time actually do have a lot of information in them, and we're trained to do this pretty quickly. So in those few minutes, we can look over an entire application and kind of glean ideas about what kind of questions we might need to ask. So we're not going to ask you about every piece of your application. We're going to probably just try to clarify certain things, and then quickly make a decision. And
that's really what the interview is all about, is really, if there's questions on what you've already given us, it's trying to sort out exactly what you meant. Some things aren't always clear on the forms, we understand that, and some things need more further explanations. So I think actually the interview is helpful for people to really kind of explain what they're trying to do and why they're trying to do it, and what their goals are. That really is one of the key things, is what are your goals?
Yep. So what kind of questions can I expect to be asked at my interview? Great question. Do we want to do a mock interview really quick?
We could do a really quick one.
Okay.
So Kalisha, where are you going to school? Where do you want to go to school?
Well, I applied to several schools in California and also on the East Coast,
Okay.
and I got into all of my top schools, but I'm really excited because I've decided to go to Stanford.
Okay, well that sounds great. So what made you choose Stanford over the other schools?
Well, I looked at the other schools. Some of them were Ivies, some of them were public schools, and really the deciding factor for me was the weather.
Okay.
I like the weather.
I know the weather in California is nice. So what are you going to be studying while you're there?
I'm planning on studying systems engineering.
Okay. And what's your highest level of education here?
Here in Nigeria, I've gotten my bachelor's degree already.
Okay. And when did you get your degree?
I got my degree in 2012.
Okay. So then after that, you did your NYSC, and
Yep,
what have you been doing
1
since
year.
then?
I've been working in my field, but in order to advance in my career, I know that I need to get a second degree. So,
All right.
yeah.
And who's going to be sponsoring you?
I have an uncle who lives in the U.S. who has agreed to pay for my studies, and
Okay.
I also have a partial scholarship from
Okay.
Stanford.
Okay. And I see that on your I-20 that you have the partial scholarship.
Yeah.
So your uncle, do you know what he does for work?
Yeah, he actually works at our university also.
Great, great. And does he work at Stanford?
No, he doesn't. He works for a California state school.
Okay. All right.
I think it's called Berkeley.
Berkeley? Yeah,
Yeah.
there might be an issue with them in Stanford. So do you have a bank statement showing that you can afford this first year?
Yeah, he gave me his bank
Okay.
statements. Here they are.
Okay, great. All right, I'm looking through it. All right, thank you very much, Kalisha. I think you're definitely qualified. I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
So obviously, a mock interview there. Everybody's situation is different. Everybody's schools are different. Everybody's reasons for going to school are different, and that's one of the reasons why we do the interview. Being able to tell your story and why you want to do this is the key. One of the things that we talk about in every one of these videos is fill out your own paperwork. A lot of people use agents. A lot of people use agents who put stuff on their applications that are not true. You're the one who best knows your story, and you're the one who can best tell your story.
That's right. So I see we have some questions coming in from our viewers, so let's go ahead and answer one of them. Isaac Ojo asked, what are the names of some universities that are qualified for international study?
And the answer to that, Isaac, is anything that is Department of Homeland Security and SEVIS approved. So Kalisha mentioned Stanford and University of California, Berkeley, but there are upwards of 3,000 to 4,000 schools in the United States that are qualified for international study.
And there's a lot of resources to figure out which schools are accredited, and
Right.
so probably you should just start with Education USA,
Yep.
who can help you to figure out that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and that's educationusa.state.gov.
Yeah, and we'll put up the websites. Yeah.
So they're a great place to start, and people have different schools. I went to a very large school for my undergraduate degree and a very small school for my graduate degree. So some people have preferences on what types of schools and the different studies that they're looking for. Some schools specialize in one thing, or another school might not.
That's right. And just a note on U.S. universities, non-visa related. I know sometimes people ask us, what is a good U.S. university? And the reality is, our perspective, and I think it's reflected throughout the U.S., is that there's universities that are more famous than others. But when it comes to what is good for your studies, I think it really comes down to who you are as a person and what would fit with your personality and your course of study. So some schools are good at some things, and there are other schools that are actually much better at them, even though they have the name. Maybe another school specializes very closely in one field that you're interested in. So, I mean, one of the things we always recommend is don't just look at the names of the schools that you hear on TV all the time, but really do the research to figure out what your school is good at, what they're known for, what their, what kind of environment it is, what kind of personality you have, and find a school that really fits you.
Absolutely. All right, so looking at another question, can my program include online courses? And the answer to that is yes, although there are limitations on that. So that is something certainly going to the Education USA site. There are more specifics on that. I believe that you're limited to one online class per semester for a full-time course load.
And that, I mean, one thing that we didn't really talk about, but you can actually do a full course of study online. It's just you wouldn't actually need a student visa to do that, right? So the student visa is for studying in the U.S. If you do an online program and you want to go, for instance, to a graduation, then you could do that on a regular B1, B2 tourist visa.
Okay.
So we have another question from Chimizia. Each student visa application costs 60,000 naira. So why keep the whole money after the visa denial? So basically, why aren't these visa fees being refunded?
And the answer to that is it's an application fee. So everyone pays a fee. It's no different than if you went into a doctor to get a checkup. Just because you didn't necessarily like the doctor's answer doesn't mean you don't pay the doctor at that point. Or a mechanic goes in and looks at your car and says, hey, okay, yeah, there's nothing wrong with it, or we don't know what it is, you still pay them for those services. So there's still a lot that goes into it. That fee is just an application fee to do that. It goes into the cost of having us here in Nigeria, having our staff go through it, upload everything, all the expenses that go into it. It's just this fee that goes into the cost of performing the service.
Great. So I see a question from Emo. What visa should an accompanying spouse or child apply for? And the answer is for every visa class that we have for these student visas, there is one specifically for spouse and children. So for instance, F1s are for the actual student, and F2 is for any of the children or the spouse of the student. We have the same thing for J1s and the same thing for M1s. So for all those visas, the most important thing to know for that is that you cannot have your visa approved as a spouse unless the actual student has an approved visa. So you cannot go to the interview before your spouse if your spouse is the student. You guys can go to the interview together if you'd like, or you can come after your spouse has already traveled.
And I think certainly, certainly timing comes into everything, of course, but certainly if you come together, it makes a lot of sense. If you're doing this, you can answer the same questions as to what we're going to be asking. If the entire family is over in the United States, working is not necessarily permitted in any type of significant quantity. How are you going to support the entire family while you're over there?
Right.
And that would be a question that would probably come up very, very first one. All right, so we're getting a number of people asking, what does 214B mean? I was refused and don't understand why.
So 214B is our most common refusal here. In a nutshell, 214B just essentially means that we do not feel that you are qualified for the visa that you're applying for. It can be for many different reasons. Since we're speaking specifically about student visas, some of the most common reasons would be we're not confident in your ability to finance the educational experience. Another common reason is maybe we think that you're using a student visa not for the purpose of being a student. So really in these visa interviews, the burden is on the applicant to show us that they're going for the intention that they tell us they're going for, and that they have the ability to actually do it. So there's two different questions there, and once we feel comfortable with both of those, we will approve the visa. But if we don't, then it's a 214B refusal.
And with 214B, it's important to note that it's not a permanent ineligibility. So there are other ineligibilities within our legal code that can lead to permanent bans. These are things using false documentation, something that could be problematic for sure. In this case, it doesn't mean you can never reapply. You can always reapply. And the way our system is set up here in the consulate is that when you reapply, you'll actually interview with a different officer.
Okay.
So if someone interviewed with myself, they would not interview with me. Even if they were put to my window, I would see that they interviewed me before, and I'd move them to another officer. So you always can reapply on those, just to make sure that, just make sure if you don't necessarily understand why you were refused, really kind of reevaluate what happened in the interview, what all the resources out there are saying, both Education USA resources as well as the embassy site. Really can try and go over it and try and understand where maybe something happened where it didn't necessarily work right. So
yeah. And I see we have a number of questions about maybe changing your course of study or what kind of school you might go to. So Bart, if somebody, well, let me just read one of the questions. We have a boss who's asking, I studied mass communications in Nigeria, but now I want to study culinary arts. And I hope that the change of course won't be a problem. So. And
my immediate answer to that is, of course not. Certainly, my own personal career, I started out in aerospace engineering and went into finance. So two completely different fields. As long as there's a logical progression and you can convince us that that's why you want to do it, what your reasonings behind it are, this is my second career. So obviously people change views, they change on what they want to do over time. If you can explain that, if you can explain why you want to be going into culinary arts, absolutely, that's perfectly fine. When there's programs out there, there's great schools in the United States that can handle culinary arts, and absolutely going there. Especially if, say, you got your degree and you've been working, say, working as a caterer or doing something where you're really building up that culinary art skill, and you want to take it to that next level, that certainly makes it even more reasonable. But there's no reason why people can't change majors. I think the statistic is 60 to 70% of all students in America change their major at least once in college. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure if maybe 50% never actually know what they want to major in, but just pick something.
Right.
But I think in the States, we are very open to people changing their course of study or their career. I mean, it's something that's very common.
Okay. So, Alatashe, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. Must I go to an Ivy League for my MBA rather than another school?
No, that's a very common misperception. You don't need to go to an Ivy League. Most people are not going to go to an Ivy League. But no, I mean, really, you can go to any school that you think fits your needs. We don't adjudicate based on the school that you're going to. We really adjudicate based on the person in front of us. So, if you want to go to a school that we've never heard of, it's not a problem. You just need to go to a real school that is accredited and that has SEVIS issuing authority.
And that's the key. If it's got SEVIS issuing authority, that alone is a credential that we understand it's a real school.
Right.
And that's really kind of it. So, then that's one of those things where some people go to the big Ivy League schools, but other people, especially if they're just starting out, go for an associate's at a community college.
And both are fine.
And both are fine.
Yeah. We have another question from Ajoro saying, do I need to take an entrance exam?
And the answer to that is no. You do not need to take an entrance exam.
For our purposes.
For our purposes, yes. Some schools may require it. There are plenty of schools that do require it. But ultimately, no, we do not require it. Does it help to have these scores? Absolutely. I think it certainly does help to say that you're a true student, that, if you've taken the GRE and you've got a score there, it shows us that you're serious about this, but it is not required.
That's right. Okay, so we have some questions about the visa process itself. People are worried about being too nervous during the interview, being refused for various reasons. Let's just talk a little bit about the interview itself. We know that people are nervous during these interviews, especially students. So as officers, we understand that, especially if you're a young student, we understand that this is probably a very big moment in your life. And we will do the best that we can to, number one, just make you feel at ease during the interview so that you can actually talk to us about what you're doing. But we don't refuse visas on the basis of you being nervous. What we're really looking for is just your ability to talk about what you're going to do. And if you understand that, I mean, hopefully you guys are not intimidated by us. But it's really just a conversation.
It is. And it's not unusual for us to say, and you'll hear it. We understand that it's very, very loud in that room. We understand it's crowded. We understand that there's a lot going on, but it's not unusual for us to just stop what we're doing, just say, all right, everybody, just take a breath, relax. We're just talking about it. We're talking about what you want to do.
Yep.
And that's it. And we understand that it's a stressful situation for everybody.
Yep. And I've even had people just go get a drink of water or use the bathroom if they really are that nervous, because we want you to be at ease and just have a conversation. You know, we're not here to, you know, we're not out to get anybody. We just want to understand what you're going for.
A question from the audience here. We do have an audience of a few people here from Education USA. How can a student demonstrate that they have a sponsor for their education? And then how much money do I or my sponsor need to qualify for a student visa?
That's a great question. One of the first ways that you demonstrate that is with your I-20. The schools do require that you submit proof of your ability to pay. That is a preliminary step because they're not vetting it at the same level that we might. So if it says on your, well, every I-20 will say how you plan on paying for it, and we will reference that during the interview. And okay, the second question is how much money do I need to qualify? So we require that you prove to us that you are able to pay for the first year of your studies. So whatever the tuition is, is it semester?
No, it's for the first full
year,
that you have the ability to pay for the first full year in liquid funds,
right,
and that you have a plan to pay for the rest of your studies.
Yeah, so we might ask you, even if you have a plan for that first year, we will. If it's a 2-year program, we're still going to ask you about your ability to pay for the second year.
And that's why in the mock interview, I asked Kalisha, you know, what is it that your uncle does for work? Just so we can get a sense of what they do for work. We can get a sense of, are they going to be able to, okay, we've got enough for the first year. Are they going to be able to cover years 2, 3, and 4, or 5? So that's really the main financial criteria.
That's great. Yeah. Okay, so we have another question from Wale Adebayo. Do you have to get a master's degree after having your first degree in Nigeria? And can you study for a second bachelor's degree in a different discipline? And the answer to that is you do not need to go straight to a master's degree. It makes a little bit more sense, and U.S. colleges tend to be fairly flexible on that. So like the previous example, I have a bachelor's degree in mass communications. Can I go for something in culinary arts, or could I go for an MBA? And the answer is yes, that's the progression. If you're doing a significant change, like if you want to go to be a medical doctor and you have a bachelor's degree in economics, then yeah, it kind of makes sense that you'll need to go for biology or something along those lines where you're going to need that background. But a lot of times, a lot of schools for graduate programs, their requirements are just that you have a bachelor's degree. So it really gets program dependent what your plan is, what you're trying to do. And that's something, one of the things what the interview helps out with is that we can suss out, we know the education system, we know what a lot of the requirements are. We can suss out whether it makes sense or not. And I think it's a common thing that we've been saying, but really it's about your ability to explain it in a way that makes sense to us. Mm-hmm. If you have a bachelor's degree in network engineering and you're going for something very similar for a second bachelor's degree, you just need to explain to us why there's a difference between those two degrees. So if it makes sense, then we're not going to be the impediment. It's really just about, is it a real course of study? Right. So any Lobo? Will my past refusals affect my next application? So every application that you submit to us, every visa interview is an independent interview. That being said, during every interview, we do look at all the information available to us, and past interviews are a part of what we look at. But at the same time, every time you come in, you're going to interview with a new officer. We do not have you go to the same person every time. So you will have a fresh set of eyes on your application, and if there's new information or there's new information available to the officer that wasn't available to the first one, then the decision might change. But obviously the previous interview is a part of the decision process. Okay, we have another question. What is the maximum number of months after the expiration of the visa that I can still be qualified for Dropbox? That is currently 12 months. Okay. And with student visas, it needs to be within the same program. There are some extra qualifications, and you can certainly go to our website on what qualifies for that on the student visas. There are a number of different little aspects of it that need to be the same. Otherwise, then you would need to come back in for an interview if you change programs. If you're even in the same school but changing into a different type of program, then you'll need to come back in for an interview. Like, for instance, if you finished your master's degree and are now doing a PhD, you'll need to come in and re-interview, even if it's at the same school in the same department. Okay, so let's see. How can one prove home ties to one's country?
That's a tough question. So there are many different things that go into ties. In addition to, family ties, that's certainly one of them. You certainly have previous travel ties is certainly another one that we look at. And with students, it's a little different because we're also looking at, an 18-year-old person isn't going to have job ties here to Nigeria. They haven't been working. What do their parents do? What are their parental ties? That's another aspect that we look at as well too. So ties are a little less important with students just because we understand that 18-year-olds don't have ties, generally speaking. So it's really what they're trying to do. This is student videos. Obviously, ties tends to be more useful with visitor visas, like tourist visas, as well as immigrant visas, and that's where it really tends to apply a little bit more. It still works with student ties, but less so on the student visas. So certainly we have future talks and we've got past talks that deal with visitor visas and immigrant visas. You can certainly find those on the website too.
Yeah, and it's great to see so many questions, so much engagement. Keep the questions coming. We're going to continue to work through as many of them as we can. So I see another question here from Akintunde. Are you allowed to share with the interviewing officer that your postgraduate plan is to have a PhD before departing the U.S.? And the answer to that is absolutely. I mean, if you have a long-term plan to, for instance, if you're entering as a 4-year bachelor's degree student, but you want to become a medical doctor, that's 100% fine. I mean, anything that you're doing that is within the scope of our visa law is fine from our perspective. And you don't have to stick to exactly what you said to us during the visa interview. I mean, what we're really looking for is just that you're going to comply with the laws of the U.S. So anything that works in that way, we're going to be okay with. And if you are studying for a PhD, well, kudos to you, because I can't do it.
That's a tough program for
Yeah.
sure. All right, another question here. Why is there no appeal when applicants are denied a visa?
From the way our law is written, the appeal process is to apply again because it's not a permanent refusal. So that's really the appeal process. That's just the way our visa law works.
And that's one of the things with the 214B refusal, that is not permanent. If somebody else gets something involving another area of our code, those tend to have other qualifications with it. There are potentials to appeal, but that it takes months on end. And some of those actually do not have. Some of the terrorism related ones don't have any appeal ability. So the appeal is a reapplication.
That's right. And here's another question. What is a service fee? It's very abstract, right?
It is very abstract.
And what do I use my I-24?
So first thing is service fee is one that is levied by a different group in the government. This is the one that handles all the tracking of students in the United States, international students in the United States. So the fees that go associated with that, that's really what the service fee covers. From there, what do I use my I-24? First thing you use it for is when you come in and talk to us. We look at that. We see what schools you're going to, what the financial ramifications are, any support that you're getting from the school, everything that goes in with that. Secondly, when you do get your visa and you go and you end up flying to the United States, you need to have your I-20 on you. If you do not have that on you, and we see this all the time with students coming back to Nigeria, they will actually put you on the next plane back home if you do not have it with you. So you need to have that with you on all time. It is part of what the U.S. government looks at, as Customs and Border Patrol look at, to make sure that you're in the United States for the purpose you're saying you're going to be there for.
Yeah, and on the service fee, I'll just mention for people who are going to several different programs, the nice thing about the service fee is you pay it once, and it actually follows you throughout your studies in the U.S. as long as there are no breaks. So when you transfer schools or when you complete your bachelor's and move to your master's, if everything administratively goes fine between your schools, then they can transfer your ID to the next school. But it is a way for the schools also to continue just keeping track of your status and how well you're progressing towards your degree.
Okay. Emmanuel asked, I've been given a student visa but unable to travel due to some reasons. Do you have to return the visa, or you can just hold your visa and travel next year?
Well, so this actually is not so much a visa question as a school question. You don't need to return your visa because we have no mechanism to take it back. But when it comes to student visas, the important thing is you can only enter the U.S. with a valid I-20. So if you are not able to go to school and the school has rescinded your admission, or if you have, basically the point is that your I-20 still needs to be valid. So if you're changing your start date, for instance, then you need the school to send you a new I-20. And if the new I-20 has a different service ID on it, then you'll need to get a new visa. Everything between your I-20 needs to match what's on your visa. So that is something that you really should coordinate with the school. If you are only delaying your travel by a couple weeks and the school is going to keep your service ID active, then you can travel on the same visa. It's not an issue. And maybe just bring a letter of explanation with you in case there are any questions from the school. But the point is you really need to work out with the school whether or not you're still admitted to the school.
And certainly, and one thing that you mentioned there that came to mind is traveling with on your visa. When you do travel on it, you can't enter the United States more than 30 days before your program starts.
That's right.
So you can't, if your program starts August 30th, you basically can't come into the United States until August 1st. If you try to come in May 10th, again, they're going to say, no, I'm sorry, you need to go. Actually, you probably wouldn't even get out of the airport.
Yeah, and this is something that is a little different with student visas than a regular tourist visa. A regular tourist visa, whatever the validity is on your visa, you can go into the U.S. whenever you choose to. It's a very flexible visa. But with the student visa, really, you're being admitted for the duration of your status. So what that means is that as long as you are a student, you're allowed to stay in the U.S. So it's much more closely linked to your status with the school, and that's why we always say make sure that you coordinate with the school.
Henry asked, what is the first step in getting a student visa?
We addressed that at the beginning, right?
Yes, I think that's certainly something.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things, in our view, the first step you should do is go to educationusa.state.gov. That is going to be the primary source of information on schools within the United States, as well as what the application process looks like.
Yeah, and Education USA, for those of you who are joining a little late, it's an office within our consulate that works with students, prospective students to the U.S., and it takes you from the process of just starting to think about going to the U.S. for school and all the way to actually packing and going to the U.S. and getting a driver's license and all those things. So they're a really great resource. It's free. It's official information. It's affiliated with the U.S. government, so it is an official source. And you can come in any Wednesday at 10 a.m. here in Lagos to meet them directly.
Absolutely.
So we have another question from Ajoro. Who signs the I-20?
Who signs the I-20? So this is definitely a question that comes up every now and then. The school obviously signs on one of the lines. If you are an adult, you need to sign on the other line. If you are a minor, your child needs to sign on the line. So if you're under 18, the parent would need to sign on that one. I mean, you need to sign that before you get on the airplane.
Yep. Okay. Can a person married to a U.S. citizen apply for a student visa after their spouse has filed for them?
That's getting complex, isn't it? Yes. And this is the technical term is called dual intent. There's certainly a number of hurdles. Usually spouses, the spouse visa process is fairly quick at this point.
I think within about 2 years you would be
you
current so that you could actually travel on an immigrant visa.
Yeah, so but certainly you can, and there are certainly times when we do have people that have dual intent. It certainly is another question that you're going to be asked in the interview because we will see that that's out there.
Right. So the short answer is it's not impossible, but it adds to the totality of the decision.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question about J visas. I'm going to do research in the U.S. on a J visa. And one of my classmates told me about a residency requirement after I finished my research. What is a residency requirement? That's a great question. The residency requirement is specifically for J scholars, people who are in the U.S. on exchange travel, and that is sponsored by the government of your country or our country, and that is intended to, so basically, why do these programs exist? Maybe I should just go back to that. These programs exist as a way to sort of knowledge share between countries. And the idea is that when you finish your program, you're going to bring that knowledge back to your country. So the residency requirement is a way for us to ensure that, that investment is actually being reaped. So it means that you have to go back to your country for about 2 years before you can immigrate to the U.S. So it doesn't apply to other types of visas. It's just if you were to get an immigrant visa or a K petition, which is a semi-immigrant visa, then you would need to first fulfill your 2-year residency requirement, which means you need to return to your country of origin for 2 years to live there before you can immigrate. And that's just something that we've worked out over the years. It's just a way to ensure that the investment that's put into J Scholars is actually reaped by the countries that are sending those scholars.
Exactly. It's designed to prevent, brain drain is the term that gets floated around. So they're usually in skills that the host country is lacking.
Right.
So they bring them. We make sure that they come back to their home country.
Yeah, and exchange scholars are really ambassadors both to the U.S. and then when they come back to their countries, really helping to bring some of that knowledge that they learned back. So,
okay.
We have a question about TOEFLs.
Okay.
So, do I need to write a TOEFL exam in order to gain admission into a U.S. university? And does passing the TOEFL assure me a scholarship?
Thank you, Prudence. Universities each have their own admission requirements. So some schools may require a TOEFL, some may not. Some may take the IELTS, some may not. Some may have their own tests. Generally speaking, it's dependent upon the university. Does passing the TOEFL assure you of a scholarship? Honestly, again, that's university dependent and scholarship level dependent. Scholarships have multiple criteria. It really is dependent upon each individual situation, each individual school, and each individual scholarship program. Unfortunately, I can't give you a better answer than that, but it is really dependent upon the school.
It's not something as we would be concerned about as if the question is about how does the TOEFL affect your visa process, from our perspective, we only look at the requirements of the school you're applying to. So if they don't require it, then we're not going to require it. Here's another question. If someone was denied, from Sunny, if someone was denied a B1, B2 visa and wanted to go for a master's, how soon can they reapply for the F1 visa?
And the answer is certainly you can reapply at any time. As long as they were denied under Section 214B, you can reapply at any time. So honestly, as was mentioned earlier, certainly you'll get a different officer. And what happened in the B1, B2 interview will be noted and seen. But ultimately, if you're applying for a student visa, that's different from a tourist visa. There's different expectations, different criteria. So it definitely, while it goes into the whole picture, it is it's not a determinant factor.
And yeah, it's a totally different purpose of travel. So it's actually very different from being denied. If you had been denied an F1 visa and you're back for the same program, that's very different than applying for a tourist visa and coming for a student visa interview. They're very different purposes of travel. So from our perspective, that's new information that would be assessed completely in a new way.
All right. Simeon asks, why do you see almost every applicant as an intending immigrant?
So the way our law is written is actually we start with an assumption that every applicant is an intending immigrant. So that's an astute observation there. So we often will say you have to overcome 214B. And the reason we say that is because every applicant does start from that assumption that you are an intending immigrant, and you have to show us that you are not. So that's really the answer.
Yeah. And it's the way our law is written. And so when us as consular officers are doing the interviews, that's our starting point. That's what we're legally obliged to start with. Okay.
Well, thank you all for all of your questions. This has been a lot of fun. I'm happy to see so much engagement. We had over 100 comments from you all. I hope that we were able to answer your questions. If not, you can continue to tune in because we'll be doing this again. I think our next Facebook Live event is on immigrant visas. So stay tuned for that. Before we end, we just like to repeat again some of the resources that you can access. The number one resource for students is going to be Education USA. We are posting the website for that right now. Education USA is located here at the consulate. Their website is educationusa.state.gov. If you're interested in becoming a student in the U.S., that's your number one resource. For those of you who are applying for a visa, if you're at that stage in your process, then you should go to our embassy website, ng.usembassy.gov/visas or ustraveldocs.com/Nigeria or /NG. I'm sorry. We're going to post all of these websites for you all. Again, thank you for tuning in. And this chat will be archived, so you can always access it in the future if you have any questions.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Good luck on your process.